Hey, everybody. We are back with another episode of Marketplace Growth for Coil. Today, we are talking about migrating your marketplace apps, and we've got a lot of interesting stuff to say on that. As of the recording of this video, I'm looking at the countdown timer right now, 147 days left until end of server. Kate, you want to say hi and let everyone know what you're going to be talking about?
Hi, guys. Really enjoy this topic. So can't wait to get into it.
Let's start with why is this an important topic to be thinking about right now?
Because it affects your revenue stream so profoundly. And I sometimes get the sense when I talk to partners is that they feel a bit powerless about migrations because it's happening, someone else is making decisions, etc. And what I really want to talk today is about how you can actually take that power back and think about the things you can control. Because at the end of the day, think of it like this is that your customers, you want to keep building your customer base, but your migrations will put you at great risk of losing it. It's like a hole. It's like a bucket. You're filling it with water and then you've got water coming out the bottom. So you want to make the loss as small as possible because make no mistake, there will be loss. And the data is definitely showing that apps are being left behind during a migration process. So let's talk today about how you can potentially close that gap.
Everything that we're talking about today is from our perspective as, if we were marketplace partners, we didn't have to go through this with Proforma, obviously, but sort of putting ourselves back in that seat. If we were marketplace partners, staring down the end of support for server, what's the path that we're going to take to get there and make sure that we don't lose any business, like Kate said, with that leaky bucket? Where should we start with this? Should we talk about why customers might leave, or do you want to start like sort of following that migration path, and then eventually we can talk about why they might leave? Where do you want to take this?
I want to start back at the customer.
Okay,
So
let's do
I
it.
would strongly urge walk in the shoes of your customers having to do a migration, small or large. Huge stress point for them, huge risks, lots of workloads, lots of things to control. So you can imagine the level of anxiety. And so if you actually start to walk in their shoes, I think that's a very good place to start because it's a little bit like when God, I'm into all these examples today, but it's a little bit like when you're moving house. You start with a lot of enthusiasm, but over time, as you get tired and worn down trying to organize everything, you kind of reach the stage of if in doubt, throw it out. You are literally just, you're very much in that way of thinking. So let's pull it back and go, well, what does that mean for us as a vendor? And a lot of partners are thinking about it during the assessment and the migration phase. And I'm saying, put some resources into the phase of during the assessment. Now, people say to me, oh, yeah, but we actually can't talk during those times about assessment. But that is the critical point that if you get considered, then you're going to get taken. As long as, of course, we're making the presumption that you've got a migration path that's decent. But if you can get into that assessment phase and you get kept, that's a huge tick for you. That's a huge tick. And it's how you manage that along the way.
What we're looking at is the migration to cloud journey that's on the Atlassian website, and we'll put that
Yeah.
on the screen as well, just so you know what we're talking to. What does that mean? Assessment stage, like just what are the details of that? What's happening in that stage, and what do you need to be aware of as a marketplace partner?
Well, let me say, I do not want to tell people how to suck eggs, but if you think about it, this is the point in time where they are deciding what they will keep and what they will drop. So it's effectively a big decision point for customers. And so what you try to think about is, well, what's important to them? So if you understand all the points in that process. Now, there's so much documentation on the Atlassian website. And I know I used to look at it and then reverse engineer it. So reverse engineer and say, if I was that customer, I would need this information. And Atlassian has given a response to say, think about these questions. They've given them checklists. And I'm saying, okay, well, how do those checklists apply to you, to me as a vendor? So have I got my migration path properly documented? Have I got my support properly in place? these are the sorts of stuff, the very basic stuff that you've got in place. And so I would go further and go, okay, once you've got that in your mind, you are thinking like a customer, go back to all your assets and your processes, and then very candidly look and say, well, how well are we doing it? So, Pete, you and I used to look at, when we were on the Atlassian, inside Atlassian, we used to look at a number of partners' documentation. And what was your reaction on the migration section of their documentation?
If I had to pick a word, undercooked might be
Yep.
might
Yep.
be the one. Yeah.
Yep.
Not enough, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
And definitely expanding on that. Yeah. Like you said before, not putting themselves in the shoes of the customer. Like what are they
Yep.
experiencing? And I think something else too that we'll probably touch on more is not just assuming that this is what's going to happen. They're a customer
Yep.
today. The assumption is that they will be a customer post migration as well. And I think that's let's say, a dangerous assumption to make. And the documentation kind of reflected that often, that we're assuming that that we're going with you. And I think that that's safe to say necessarily, not to scare anybody, but it's just one of those things that I think you should be considering. And it should be reflected in that documentation as well, or anywhere that you have those touch points with your customers.
So what would some of that documentation, doing a quick audit of your documentation, what are some of the things that you would want in there? Like what would put the customer at ease, do you think, in your mind,
Well, you
with
mentioned
respect to migration?
well, you mentioned the pathway. I think that's an important thing. And
Yep.
from the conversations that we've had, both inside Atlassian, outside, talking to partners, talking to marketplace team at Atlassian, that there seems to be, you hear a lot about post migration. I think it's what is that pathway through migration, documenting what kind of support you have available to your customers. As you mentioned before, there's a pretty high stress time for a lot of people. I mean, the ecosystem is just sort of full right now, right? For everyone that we talk to at capacity doing this migration stuff, that includes the customers as well. It's not just solution partners that are doing this for them. It's everybody, all hands on deck. And if you're not sort of just putting out to your customers, making it easy for them to understand how you're there to support them in that journey and help them make that decision to keep you or not. If your documentation reflects that and you've thought through what that plan looks like, I would try to document as much of that as possible. And I think overkill is probably the best way to go with this.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
hold anything back?
Well, I think that comes to the point here, isn't it? Because you're making your assessment on your features. So, I can just imagine the conversations that customers are having. They'll be looking to see how well and how much an app is used. They'll be looking to see the track record of service support. Is it worth the price? They'll be asking themselves all these sorts of questions. And you want your champions within these businesses to say, oh, for God's sake, don't
Yes.
let it go. This is critical. This is critical. Don't let it go. Now, some partners are going to have an easier time where they're mission critical. If you're very, very sticky, then they're more likely to spend time. And I would propose, my hypothesis would be that if you're a reasonably simple app, they're not going to contact you at all. So if they're not going to talk to you at all, then you better make sure you've got your feature comparisons, for example, between server and cloud or server and DC really nailed down. Do not leave ambiguous stuff. Be very clear of what can be done, what can't be done, the limitations, so that anyone, like a solution partner, anyone can properly assess to say, is this going to work, trying to actually make this app come with us? And I've seen some examples of partners saying, it's too complex, pick us up on the other side. Now, I would be saying, hurrah, because at least you've been honest, because you're not letting people start the process and just making it hard. So in those instances, which are rarer, I would be then very much saying, how can I make it easier to get on the other side? And I would be teasing, I would be using promotions, I would be using priority support stuff. I would be using anything in my book to keep as many customers as possible, because it is so much easier to keep them now and to lose them and have to try and win them back. And
And
what's
I,
even worse
yeah,
is losing them to another competitor, because just don't give them the opportunity.
yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before recording, right? That the marketplace has gotten a lot more crowded, and the competition's there,
Mm-hmm.
and the competition's getting pretty hot
Mm-hmm.
in some of the spaces
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
some newer, younger companies on the marketplace aren't afraid to come in and undercut on price.
Yeah.
And if you're putting yourself back in that position to be considered again, that means you're being considered against the competition. And if someone's going to
Yep.
say we're a tenth of the price for 80% of the solution, look out.
Game over. Game
It's
over.
again,
Yeah.
this isn't to be scary. It's just this is worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And I know it's not an easy thing to think about when you've got teams maybe at capacity, but you mentioned the leaky bucket. This is, I think, an important part of like establishing your business for longevity is planning for this migration and trying to be as upfront about it as you can. And what came to mind as you were talking about that is we've recently been doing like one pagers for solution partners, like make it easy for solution partners to understand problems that you solve, who you solve it for, et cetera, how they can work apps into their current solutions. It's the same thing, I think, for migrating customers. It's what's the simplest way to explain to them why you're worth going with, and take us with you. Here's how it happens. Again, talk about those features, talk about the limitations. I think we've talked about this a number of times. I think even on video here that talking about limitations actually goes a long way
Yeah.
with customers. So there's no
Yeah.
surprises. And that did help us a number of times.
Yeah.
Just you're being honest. So you're building up that trust with the customer, and then B, there aren't any surprises for them that, especially if you're talking DC to cloud, sometimes you're going to have you want to have feature parity, and just be upfront about that, what that means, what the workarounds could be,
Yeah.
etc.
And I understand that there are technical limitations. So we are not being naive to know that you can have lots of different scenarios depending on your app and depending
Yeah,
on the environment that you're going to be moved into. So we're not downplaying any of that at all, And that's also about engineering smarts and all sorts of stuff like that. But what we're talking about is the things you can control your engineering to some extent, depending on some of the limitations with Atlassian stuff. But what we're talking about here is actually taking back control and power and being proactive rather than reactive, which I understand is a difficult space because sometimes you don't know when you're going to get the migration. But let's just step back and go again. You've got your customer list. You've got your server list. That gives you some indication. So you
yeah,
will have, for example, the size. You will have how long they've been with you. You'll get your industry and you'll get your industry. So all of those can actually help you make decisions. And then I've also heard where people said, well, we've asked customers and solution partners, but no one has come back to us and told us stuff. And I said, well, it's how you're asking. So, for example, if you're just asking things like, will you be migrating and when? If you actually flip that around to things like, we're really keen to help you in your migration journey and we need to actually have a heads up, because if we have a heads up, it means we can do this X, Y, Z for you.
yeah,
And to make sure you get a smoother journey, we're going to make sure you have priority service, you give some incentives, et cetera, and say, sign up and tell us now. For example, sign up and tell us now. You may only get 10%, but that's better than the 10% that you didn't have.
yeah.
So I'm a really big believer about trying to engage and be human and say, we know this is going to be tough, but we will be here for you. We're not going to try and let you down.
So are you suggesting that like this is a really high touch?
Depending on how, I'm assuming the big players probably got hundreds and hundreds, but if there are all those partners out there that are, let's say, 800 server customers, you don't know what's happening with them. That's a decent amount of revenue, but that is manageable. That is manageable if you actually segment. You know how we always talk about segments? If you segment, and you segment around loyalty, if you segment how well do they know us, how much do they use us, how much are they paying, how long have they been paying, you can actually start to batch up and you can start to target and talk. Now, you might say, well, why should we do all of that? That seems like a lot of work for maybe no return. But I'm sitting there going, but that's a damn sight more powerful place to be than just to wait to see next month's transaction list. They're gone, or
Yeah.
they're said they're going or whatever. And of course, you'll opt into all the things like the dual licensing and all of that. You just make it friction-free, as frictionless as possible. And I know that's not always realistic. And how can you add your value? How can you
Yeah.
add your value during this migration process?
Yeah. If you do have a large user base and customer base that is in server, yeah, I'd be taking a very close look at that. What I guess kind of surprised me so far out of this conversation is you said it before. It's like if you feel powerless, it's kind of like taking that power back as a marketplace partner. I would underscore that many, many times. I think that's such an important maybe mindset shift that you can control a lot more than maybe you think you can.
Absolutely.
You may not be getting heads up that big customer X is going to be migrating, but yeah, why not take that proactive approach to it and kind of just try to get ahead of it? And I think there are some creative ways that you can go about doing that and getting your customers' attention.
Really think about it. You've got everyday support and you've got people coming in on tickets on support and their server. And, if they have if they're a JIRA administrator, why wouldn't you actually have a whole series of pre-prepared questions saying, are you guys planning on migrating? If you are, who can we talk to? How can we help you? How can we work with you? And then all your documentation backs it up. All your documentation, it's there. It's your features, it's your limitations, it's how we can do extra. Talk to us. Don't walk away. And that then begs the question on support, Pete, is that people go, oh, yes, but we don't have 24/7 support.
Yeah.
And we know that migrations are going to be out of hours or over weekends. So as a former founder, and I know because we were migrating and we had last minute calls asking us to help with migrations on a Friday night. Be lovely.
Yeah.
Here I was in Australia, 9:30 at night, and I would find out we had a migration happening the next morning. So then we'd have to find an engineer. So then, all of that business. And I'm sitting there going, plan for it. Basically, you've got between here and end of server. And I would say plan for adding in extra support. It's an extra cost, but it's a damn sight lot cheaper than having to get a new sale.
I think that's important to note too, right? That all the time, energy, resources that you have to put into selling to the same customers, that wouldn't feel very nice.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So just on that, I think that's another thing that we often talk about, when we're talking to marketplace partners is how are you leveraging support and that as a channel to ask the right questions. Really like the idea of having, you can have your canned responses in there that pop that in there, hey, your server, what's happening? Just
PS.
PS, or
Yeah.
just even say like, hey, if there's any talk of migration, don't have to talk about it on this ticket, but here's a link. Just use the channels that you have as effectively as you can. I don't think that time and energy would go to waste. And especially if you're efficient with that, you can actually make a big impact without huge effort.
And we're not being Pollyanna about this. I fully appreciate how difficult this all is everyone. This is a transformation. So I get this. I'm not saying that, but I'm actually saying I'm damned if I'm going to lose. If this is me, I would be like a dog with a bone. I would be running down every single customer that I could get. And you would know that, Pete. You know that around me about I hate losing customers. I hate losing them. Hate losing them. Want to know why I've lost them and can I get you back?
Lost revenue sucks.
Oh, it totally sucks.
Yeah.
Totally sucks.
It's a hard thing to go through, but if you want to fight for your business, I think this is it.
Yeah. And you analyze every opportunity. So you're doing server release notes, like Jira compatibility updates.
Yeah.
Put it in your release. It's like literally do an audit of where the hell can I talk about migration and how we can help you. And just keep reminding people about the value you offer, the problem, the solutions that you offer, value, more value, less friction, more value, less friction. And then underpinning that I'm a practices and processes person and systems girl. Underpinning that is you have a cycle of continuous learning. You
Yeah.
actually set up all the mechanisms across your business, and how do you get those feedback, and then how do you incorporate it into your documentation? How do you incorporate that in how you on support? How do you incorporate the people who are currently selling? How do you incorporate that when you speak with Atlassian?
What's the quick overview? Like, where would you start? Just give us the steps here to sort of recap.
Cold hard look at what you're saying, whether that's in written form, verbal form, getting a very clear understanding of how well you've migrated in the past, and the learnings and the difficulties, and applying them in. And the third thing is focusing and prioritizing, because you don't want to lose the customers.
Best time to start this was probably yesterday. Next best time is whenever you're watching this. So
Every
get
step is
cracking.
a step forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of opportunity in this too. I think,
Yeah.
if you can, last thing I'll say on this is, like, if you can show your customers a level of dedication that they'll remember, and they decide to keep you through this progress and post migration, you will build more and more champions within these companies if you're there to support them and hold their hands through this process and make it as easy as possible. That's, I think, the goal.
Well, I think we haven't really talked also about solution partners, and really they're your partners. So, if they're giving you feedback that this hasn't been easy or this hasn't gone well, it's taking it seriously. It's taking it seriously.
I think everything that you've touched on kind of applies the same, right? That in
Yeah.
principle, you're there to support. I would kind of bucket solution partners in as customers in this
Yeah.
sort of migration planning, right? That, what kind of considerations do they have? Do they need? It'll be the same. If you were to take everything that you said before, and if you wanted to, and you have the time, like, copy paste, but also just modify it a bit. This is the solution partner pack. This is the customer pack. I find that stuff
Yeah.
goes a long way.
And a point of contact. Point of contact if things go wrong,
Yeah.
because that's huge on the trust thing.
I'm going to wrap us up there because I think we could talk about this for hours, but I think that's been a really good discussion around why you should be thinking about your migration plans. Yeah, really go back and have a good, honest look at where you're at today and how you're going to get to and beyond the migration with as many customers as possible.
Yeah. More power to you.
All right. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. That is us for this week. If you have any questions, please drop a comment below or DM us on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to talk about this stuff, as you can see, wherever we are. Thanks for watching.
Bye, guys. Till next time.